How are you guys doing? Today is Saturday, May 21st, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile for Josh Allen. The elite starting quarterback for the Buffalo Bills turns 26, and what I'm going to do with this episode is, of course, do an in-depth review of what he's been able to do up until his 26th birthday today, and of course, he's going to continue to get better, so as the years go on, I'm going to extend it by a year, but this is what Josh Allen has done up until his birthday in 2022. If you're not familiar with Josh Allen, he stands at about 6'5", 237 pounds. I would best describe his game as he's just a player that has effortless quarterback strength, and I think it definitely translates into his game. I think that when Buffalo got him, he was a little bit more of a raw product, but as soon as they started to build like a team around him, he was able to make a lot of the throws that a lot of other NFL players couldn't, and of course, being able to design an offense around that pretty much made the Buffalo Bills a very unstoppable offense as long as he's really had control. And as long as Josh Allen is able to really control that energy and that hype, which he's done a really good job of doing, he is a serious threat. Not to mention that he can run incredibly well as too. He's one of the quieter dual threats in the NFL, but he is definitely a passing threat through the air. He is a dude that can make almost all the throws, and I don't think we're really close to seeing the best of Josh Allen. And Josh Allen has made some very impressive runs. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into his profile. So, originally coming out of Firebaugh, California, he would originally start out going to Reedley College, which is a community college in California. In his lone season there, he would go on to, according to Wikipedia, of course, he led an offense that would average about 450 yards of offense. Not to mention that he would go on to average about 300 passing yards himself. The team averaged like 40 points a game. But after his lone season, he would end up getting recruited to play at Wyoming because they were originally trying to recruit someone else on the team. But they would, of course, realize that Josh Allen was a big part of the reason that they were so good. So following that season at JC, he would go on to play his first season at the University of Wyoming as a sophomore in 2015. And of course, 2015 would be his age 19 season. And in that year, playing football in at least the Mountain Conference at that time, he would go on to play 2 games in a season where the Wyoming Cowboys would end up going 2-10. That was, of course, before they would turn things around. But in that game, in those 2 games, he would probably throw for about 51 yards as he would just get a couple reps at the position. Of course, you would understand that, being a sophomore, being completely moved in. But he would actually go on to suffer a broken collarbone that season. He would go on to qualify for a medical red shirt. And he would go on to come back for his first official full season for his redshirt sophomore season at Wyoming in 2016, which was his age 20 season. In his first full season with Wyoming, in the season that he played the most games, he would go on to play 14 games for a Wyoming team that would end up going 8-6. As within this year, they would go on to win their division, their conference. They would end up going to the Poinsettia Bowl. They would actually end up losing the Poinsettia Bowl that game, as looking at how Josh Allen would fare within that game himself. He would throw for about 207 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. That was when they played against Tanner Magnum, when Tanner Magnum was the BYU quarterback. In that regular season, Josh Allen would go on to complete about 56% of his passes. He would throw for 3,203 yards, and looking at how he fared on the ground, he would run for about 523 yards. He had about 37 total 100 yards of offense that year. He threw for 28 touchdowns and ran for 7. He would also have a receiving touchdown as well, as he had 36 total touchdowns against his 15 interceptions. As that would be the season he would score the most within a Mountain West season. Following that 2016 season, he was named to the second team All-Mountain West. And following that season, of course, he would return to Wyoming for what would be his redshirt junior season. And in that redshirt junior season, he would go on to play 11 games in a season in which the Wyoming Cowboys would go 8-5 under Craig Bohl for Craig Bohl's third season there. That year, they would go on to make it to the Idaho Potato Bowl, where Josh Allen was named the MVP of that game. He would end up throwing for 154 yards and 3 touchdowns. But looking at how Josh Allen would go on to fare for the season, Josh Allen will go on to complete about 56% of his passes for the second year in a row. As through the air, he would go on to throw for 1,812 yards. On the ground, he had 200 yards and about 5 touchdowns, combining for about 21 of them. Not to mention that, he would also go on to even record a tiny little reception for himself. But following that season, he would go on to go to the NFL draft. Many people really believed in what he could do. They believed in his raw talent. They believed in in his capabilities and what he could do on an NFL team with his body. I mean, he is 6'5", and he did have that effortless strength, and teams were able to really kind of take a chance on him. Josh Allen would be taken with the 7th overall pick in the 2018 NFL draft. This was the draft in which Baker Mayfield was the first overall quarterback taken. Josh Allen was the 3rd quarterback taken, the highest drafted Pro Bowler. Josh Rosen was also taken in this round. This is the draft where Lamar Jackson, the eventual former NFL MVP, would be taken with the last pick in this first round. So, of course, from the very beginning, his career has kind of been compared to Lamar's unfairly. But Josh Allen has really been able to really kind of create a lane for himself in his own respect, as he was drafted by the Buffalo Bills, clearly a team that needed a quarterback. And ever since he's been drafted by the Buffalo Bills, he has literally cemented himself as the go-to franchise guy in Buffalo, I would say right now. His very first season with the Buffalo Bills would be his age 22 season in 2018. In that season, he would start 11 of the 12 games he played in a season where the Bills would finish with a 6-10 record. This very first season was actually pretty tough for Josh Allen, as he would have to compete with A.J. McCarron and Nathan Peterman, but eventually he would earn the starting job. But in that first season, he would go on to complete 52% of his passes, as he threw for 2,074 yards. On the ground, he would go on a run for 631 yards, as he would finish with about 2,700 yards of total offense. He would throw for 10 touchdowns, as he would go on to run for 8. He had 18 total touchdowns in the 12 games he played. He would throw for 12 interceptions. He threw for more interceptions than he did passing touchdowns. As that year, it would be tough for the Bills to be like, okay, yes, this is our starting guy. Following that season, of course, he would make a lot of adjustments. In the next season, we would be coming back in his sophomore season, raring to go after his season in which he went 5-6 as a starter. In his second season, he would go on to start all 16 games in his age 23 season for a Buffalo Bills team that would go 10-6 in 2019. They would make the playoffs for the second time in a 3-year stretch, after having not made, or after the 2017 season was the first time they had made the playoffs in the 21st century. So that, just to give a sense of how historic that was. But in that 2019 season, in just the second season, he would lead the Bills to the playoffs after completing about 59% of his passes. He would throw for 3,089 yards, the first time he would throw for over 3,000 yards. He ran for 510 yards, and he would go on to finish with 9 touchdowns on the ground, the most rushing touchdowns he had. But in addition to his 3,600 total yards of offense, he would go on to throw for 20. So he would have not 29 total touchdowns on the season. He would also throw 9 interceptions. To this day, his 9 interceptions in 2019 were the least amount of interceptions he's thrown. I imagine he's definitely wanted to work on his interception numbers, but I mean, 9 isn't that bad. And then following that 2019 season, he would go on to help the Bills into the playoffs, but they would end up losing in the wild card round to Deshaun Watson and the Texans. But of course, in just 2 seasons, he would lead the Buffalo Bills to the playoffs. I gotta leave enough pause so you know that it's the Buffalo Bills that he's leading to the playoffs. Josh Allen's third season with the Buffalo Bills would be his age 24 season, and in that season, that would be the lone year that he has made the Pro Bowl in his career. In just his third season, he would start all 16 games for a Buffalo Bills team that would win the AFC East for the first time since 1995. Because remember, we're talking about the Bills franchise here. This was, of course, this was right after the stretch after the Bills had gone to the championship 4 years in a row and missed it. So that was how long ago it was. But Josh Allen, in just his third season as the starter, second season as the full-time starter, would go on to lead the Bills to an AFC East title. And of course, this Tom Brady leaving the AFC East would also help as well. And this was, of course, during the quarantine season in which the NFL teams weren't allowed to have fans in the stands during the regular season. However, he would go on to help the Bills finish with a 13-3 record. In that season, he would go on to complete a career-high 69% of his passes. That's the first time he would cross the 60% completion percentage threshold. He would throw for 4,544 yards, which is the most passing yards he's thrown in a season to this day. The first time he would pass the 4,000-yard threshold, he would also go on to run for 400 yards. He would go on to finish with just under 5,000 total yards on the season. He would go on to throw for 37 touchdowns. That'll be the most touchdowns he has thrown in a season. He would go on to rush for 8 touchdowns as well, as his 45 touchdowns are the most touchdowns that he's had in a season. He would go on to finish with 10 interceptions on the year as well, just to get a sense of how dynamic he was. And in that 2020 season, he would go on to be named to the Pro Bowl for the very first time. And to be named as a quarterback is crazy. And then in addition to that, he was named to the second team All-Pro, the first time that he has ever been named to an All-NFL team. And it's the only time that he's been named to one so far up until this point. And following that season, he would go on to help the Buffalo Bills make it to the playoffs. But this was also the season where Brian Daboll would win the Assistant Coach of the Year. In that first round, the Bills would go on to beat the Colts by a field goal. In the divisional round, they would end up beating the Ravens by a couple of touchdowns. And then they would end up losing in the AFC Championship by 2 touchdowns to Kansas City. As the Chiefs would go to the Super Bowl that year, they would eventually go on to lose to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as the Buccaneers played that game in Raymond James. As the last team to win the AFC East, that quarterback ended up beating the Chiefs. So, of course, the AFC East did end up getting some revenge on the Chiefs. But following that last season, this would, of course, lead to this most recent season that he's played with the Bills, his 4th season in the league, and, of course, the first season in which the NFL would expand its game to 17 games for all teams. In that season, he would start all 17 games for a Buffalo Bills team that would go 11-6 and win the AFC East for the second time. This is the first time the Buffalo Bills have gone back-to-back since 1991. That year that was the 4th year in a row they had won the East, by the way. So, of course, he was creating history just in the very beginning of his career so far, as in the 17 games he played, he would end up completing 63% of his passes. The second season, he's completed at least 60%. He would go on to throw for 4,407 yards. That is the second season in a row he's thrown for over 4,000 yards, and he would also go on to rush for 763 yards on the ground. This is the first season that he would go on to eclipse 5,000 total yards. He would go on to throw for 36 total touchdowns, and in addition to the touchdowns he would finish with on the ground, that's 42 total touchdowns on the That's 42 total touchdowns on the year, not to mention that he would throw for a career-high 15 interceptions as well, as Josh Allen is coming off of a season that definitely modeled his first one, in which he was a second-team All-Pro. He would go on to lead the Bills into the playoffs, as the Bills would go on to beat the Patriots by 30 in the wild card round, of course giving Buffalo Bills fans all the satisfaction they wanted in the world after all the times the Patriots have destroyed them, beat them into the dirt. And then they would go on to lose in the divisional round in overtime to the Chiefs. The Chiefs would end up winning the coin toss and scoring in the first drive, but that's how the rules are set up. And I would imagine because Josh Allen was the one that lost, the NFL is changing that rule. So I think Josh Allen's influence is at least measured there. But but all of that leads to where we are right now, as Josh Allen is prepared to enter his 5th season in the NFL playing for this Buffalo Bills team, where of course he is already the franchise guy, and I imagine the Buffalo Bills are not. I imagine they would go on. They already got him taken care of right before this last season, as they did hook him up with a $258 million 6-year contract extension. So he is scheduled to be there for quite a bit, and I cannot wait to see what he does with this team. And considering he's very young, I do think that his best football is definitely ahead of him. And if his best football is ahead of him, the NFL needs to watch out. But with that said, I want to thank everyone for listening. I do hope all is well, and I will catch you with more tomorrow. Hopefully by this time next year, I'll have more to talk about when it comes to Josh Allen. But with that said, I want to thank everyone once again. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with more tomorrow. Peace out.